that's quick.
Great. No, thanks, Simon. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Any other twins in the room? All right. One. That's it? Okay. It's not really that interesting. I always had a lot of friends ask me, like, oh, what's my twin sister thinking? It's like, what are you thinking? You know? So, anyways, first, let me just introduce myself. Matt Doyle. I'm an associate principal with IQVIA in our strategy consulting group. I focus primarily on omnichannel transformations as well as new commercial models. So there's a lot of great topics this morning. AI, machine learning, data, right? So there's a lot of complexity, right? And so what we're going to talk about today is more of what does that mean to an organization? How can they best prepare for that? And certainly what are some learnings that they can, kind of take away from and basically feed that back into their ecosystem. But first I'll kind of start with introductions of the panel. So Chris.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Weber. I'm the head of customer experience at Takeda Oncology.
Hey everyone, I'm Niveditha Mogali from GSK. Been in pharma for most of my career and then also part of healthcare marketing, agency work, as well as consulting.
And Matt Smith, senior principal in IQVIA's strategy consulting group, where I lead a team focused on omnichannel and a new commercial model. You don't have to be called Matt to be on the team, although it does help. And for the eagle-eyed amongst you, Jorge, unfortunately, last minute couldn't be here for personal health reasons, so he sends his apologies, but we'll still have a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for joining us, and certainly we want to keep this somewhat brief, and we know that we're in between you and eating lunch, so, but certainly, as you have questions at the end, we want to certainly take time for that, and certainly can talk afterwards. So today what we're going to talk about is really what is the impact of omnichannel, and I know that some of the previous sessions defined, how do they describe what omnichannel is, but what does that impact on customer experience, right? And so that's also, that could be from a strategic point of view, but also operationally, right? And so when we say less is more, it's not just how do we get more channels, more data, more content, more. It's how do we also optimize our operating model, right? And so when we say less, it's understanding what investments are we currently focused on, and how can we optimize those? So it's kind of a blend of both, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. In terms of omnichannel planning itself, right? So keeping simplicity in mind. So test and control. Understand what you're investing in and how can you use that information to then feed it back into your commercial model. Whether it's field facing, right, with new or innovative roles, right? So there's a lot of innovation that is being talked about, right? And as we know, that's very disruptive, right? And oftentimes organizations are not ready to take on that change. And let's be honest, change it's scary. Right? They don't know if it's going to work. They don't know if it's going to have the right impact. And so some of that we'll talk about as well in terms of how can you understand what that impact means to your customer base as well as to your organization. And then lastly, we'll kind of talk about just tales of the industries, right? So key learnings, right? Many of us have been through a lot of transformations, small scale, large scale, many different client types. So we want to understand what are those successes and what are some of those opportunities where organizations can really feed that back into what they're trying to do over the next 5+ years. So we'll start with Chris on the first question. And so we've seen a lot of investment focused on innovation, right? So innovation is kind of the hot topic, and the topic for today is seemingly AI, right? And so what does that mean, and how can we use innovation, whether it's AI or something similar, how can that really kind of feed into what we're looking to get to from a digital virtual space? So Chris, from your perspective, what would you say is some of the more innovative or impactful components that have been introduced over the past recent years?
So for me, and I'll start kind of where I am now at Takeda, and Takeda is a global player in the pharmaceutical space, but Takeda Oncology is much smaller than that. And Takeda Oncology moves quick, moves fast, and so people are looking to us to be the innovative leaders to say, what is working for your customers, for your HCPs, for your patients, for your caregivers? What can we be doing better, and what can we take at the enterprise level and apply that to some of our other business units? So this innovation really comes to us first. And I don't love the way some of it works where, hey, we have this technology that we think you should use or try. Instead, we're kind of turning that around from an oncology space and saying, hey, here's what we've looked at, here's what we're trying and testing and making sure it works for our customers and our customer base. Here's where we want to make certain investments into technologies. And I know everyone's kind of expecting me to talk about AI a little bit, but it really has been interesting. I just had a conversation with our medical colleagues yesterday about some of the AI tools they're looking to predict patient outcomes, which was really fascinating to me. I didn't realize we had some of these tools internally. And the discussion was more around, well, what are you guys doing on the commercial side by using AI? And I said we've assessed some AI modeling before, but really what we're using it to do is trying to identify when are patients starting to switch therapies. And for us, that's a really big indicator for customer journeys, because some of our products might be second, third line indication. And so to switch therapies from kind of a market leader within the first 30, 60, 90 days is pretty critical. So for us, it's all about timing and how we get to that patient and really those HCPs in those offices as soon as possible. So for us, I think the AI piece is obviously very important, but it's not kind of our only driving factor. We have other components for us that's important with digital innovation to marry up what we can do on the digital side and what we can do on more that, let's call it face-to-face side. So we have our field team, which isn't just our sales team. We have our sales team, we have our MSLs, we have our account managers, we have our field reimbursement managers. So they don't talk to one another. They say they do, but they really don't. So what we're trying to do is trying to find innovative solutions that can help bridge the gap between what we do on the digital side and what those field teams do. So we're all telling a consistent message at the right time. And for us, we're really looking for technologies that can bridge the gap between both of those. And then last time for us is really, I was alluding to this, is real-time data. So for us, real-time data is important when it comes to, sure, it's switching therapies. We can kind of predict that in a couple months' time. But for us, it's also when patients get diagnosed with certain diseases. And we're getting this lab data on it used to be weekly, now it's a daily basis, because we realize there's absolute importance in getting this data as soon as possible so we can take action on it. We've made these investments that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we realized we weren't really acting on this real-time data. So we've made a huge push within the organization to say, all right, if we're getting lab alert data, if we're getting conference attendance data, if we're getting publishing information, white paper publishing information, right, we can take that information and action on it from a digital lens, but also send the right MSL, send the right sales rep at the right moment in time to try to engage with them. So for us, that's what digital innovation is for us.
Yeah, no, and you actually mentioned a really good point around actionability, right? And so oftentimes organizations are trying to add more data and more insights, and really the key is to translate that into what becomes actionable, right? And so that could be from a field role, an HQ role, the marriage of the two, right? And so understanding how do they play together, and certainly how does that also feed into some of your content deployment, right? There's a few sessions focused on how do we be faster, more precise, how do we get that right message out at the right time. And so it's discerning the right insights to make sure that, hey, is this actionable? If it's not, then we probably should deprioritize it, right? Because ultimately, depending on the organization size, but and certainly with just how the market is, there's no money trees out back, right? So investments need to be very precise themselves. It's not just the tool or the platform you're looking to buy. Obviously, yes, that's what they offer. They offer precision, but you as an organization, as you think about transformation, it's how can you be more precise with your money, right? And so that's to me pretty critical, and certainly it all kind of goes back to actionability of what insights do you have at your fingertips. Matt, maybe you could provide a little bit more of an industry perspective across kind of the clients that we typically work with.
Yeah, happy to. And I mean, it's funny, I've heard this question asked or been part of these kind of questions in the past. You tend to find the industry as a whole is less comfortable singing its praises than it is positioning itself as that 5 years, 10 years behind. We'll definitely get onto the fact that maybe there hasn't been as much progress as we would like, but I do think there are examples of innovation with impact. I mean, I think certainly on the HCP side of the fence, I think there are instances now where there's more awareness and more of a desire to build that user experience and that kind of pull-based interaction where you're focusing more on HCP self-service, more on sort of building that consistency of experience so that the HCP can pick and choose when, where, and how to interact, just instead of kind of doing we'll segment and we'll do the customer journey, but we'll still push the same 3 messages out. I think we're getting better at trying to sort of meet the HCP, and Equally, recognizing that the HCP is a consumer and a sort of a regular human being too. They have those kind of, blue jean moments. I think that's a positive step forward. I think, related to that, I feel like there's a greater desire and willingness and more investment recently on that intersection between the HCP journey and the patient journey, and using some of those sort of beyond the pill digital solutions and services to enable that connection. How do we sort of meet supply with demand, so to speak, in terms of the patient coming into the doctor's office and there being that sort of harmony with pharma models in between, and just that kind of digital engagement around that. And then I guess lastly, another area that stands to mind, and you touched on this a little bit, Chris, is it feels like the medical and the commercial organizations are coming together in some of the latest innovations, that we're seeing more of that digital understanding around medical engagement, MSLs, and sort of not necessarily directly lifting and shifting from commercial, but how can we sort of borrow some of those principles into the innovative setting around sort of digital medical engagement, and that the gap between the two functions within the organization is closing a little bit. So, I think there's lots of promise. I still think it's easier to find individual brand, individual market, one-off instance than it is to find true enterprise scale of doing most of the things right most of the time. But we'll get onto that later in the conversation, I think.
Yeah, no, certainly. And, just to kind of add to what you just mentioned, so even, some strategic insights which could be, as you mentioned, these HCPs are also consumers, right? So it's, what are the relationships amongst themselves, right? And so there's many new insights that are out there, whether it's more socially driven, whether it's through different behaviors, right? Whether it's going to congresses and whatnot, but it's understanding the relationship of the folks out there. And if there's a high level target and that particular HCP has 20 or 15 close followers, we also could say that, hey, we also value these HCPs as well, almost equally, right? And so understanding what does that ecosystem mean from a data perspective, and then injecting that back into whether it's your field force operations, what content do you want to send to those types of resources and how often. So it's using some of those relational insights to kind of further inform that. Matt, you also did mention earlier that progress has been a little bit stymied, right? And so obviously there's regulation in our industry that plays a big part in that. But certainly I think, to me, a lot of what I've seen is just the ability to adapt and to change from more of a nimble perspective. And so when we say agile, it's more of a lowercase agile, meaning nimble. Now some organizations are kind of more of the uppercase agile, like, hey, we have a tried and true methodology, and we can actually successfully execute this efficiently. But I think overall there's just certain handcuffs that exist that organizations are trying to operate around. But Nivi, maybe we could start with you in terms of progress that's been a little bit stymied. Where would you say that organizations struggle the most when they're adding new capabilities or new elements within their ecosystem?
I think there's definitely key considerations when we talk about some of the struggles, right? Like, how do you bring in new channels is one thing, but then how do you integrate it with your existing ecosystem? And how do you scale that to ensure all teams can actually make use of that ecosystem? Along with that also comes the entire process of adoption and change management. How do you bring your teams along to start using these new channels or new capabilities? And most importantly, I think to get that sort of buy-in with everybody in the organization, it's very important to showcase how you could measure that capability. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, maybe you could add to that a little bit.
No, happy to. And we have the luxury of working across sort of from the smallest sort of startup to the largest player. I do think there are some sort of common themes in terms of organizations making similar sort of mistakes or falling into the same pitfalls. As an industry, we seem to struggle a bit with chronic pilotitis in this space. So there's that notion of we can do something innovative, but we get overly enamored with that sort of innovative idea, and we perhaps don't upfront define the strategic direction, or importantly, I think the path to scale. So it's this: do a pilot, move on to the next pilot, move on to the next pilot, move on to the next pilot, rather than necessarily what are the learnings, how do we drive scale, how do we embed that. So, we do some really interesting stuff, but then it sort of withers away as we move on to the next thing. I still think that most of the medium to larger sized organizations struggle with that silo of operations that, we can talk about customer experience and customer centricity. That everybody's got an interest and sort of skin in the game, but there tends not to be singular accountability for that end-to-end customer experience. So you end up with everybody being interested, but no singular person within the organization truly being accountable for pulling through a harmonized, seamless execution. So again, you end up with the sales team doing one well-intended thing, the marketing team doing another well-intended thing, the data and analytics team doing yet another well-intended thing, but they're perhaps all, one's moving northwest, one's moving north, and one's moving northeast, and they don't quite align, so you end up with duplication, redundancy, kind of waste of time as well. But yeah, those are a couple of the big areas that we see kind of repeating themselves time and time again.
Yeah, certainly. And just to touch on that with, kind of the marriage of strategy and operations as well, it's, oftentimes the business has these, very innovative ideas like, oh, we want to do X, Y, and Z. But I think just having that inclusive, basically breaking down the silos, bringing in data governance, bringing in IT and other functions that they're your enabling functions, right? And so, oftentimes there's a little bit of an identity crisis of, a pharma company wants to also be a technology company. And it's like, well, hey, that's not your product, right? There's plenty of partners in the room here that, that's their bread and butter, right? And so, use those assets to what they're capable of being leveraged for, so you can be better at what your product is, right? And I think it was Paul mentioned 18 launches in 3 years or something. That's insane, right? But basically, if you looked at that model, it's very simple, right? It's like, hey, we want to be really simple so we can rinse and repeat and kind of get this out the door and get it to market, right? They're not focused on, hey, let's build a new technology internally. Let's stand up these new field roles. Or there's little disruption in something, an approach such as that. So it really allows them to focus on being a business, right? Versus trying to do something that they're, maybe not adept to do.
Matt, I'll add one thing to that
Yep.
too, and something that we're really doing is thinking about this long-term plan, right? We have this 3-year customer experience journey, right? And I think that's great for leadership, but everyone else is like, well, am I going to be here in 3 years? Am I going to help achieve this with you? I don't really know. So what we're doing is to say, listen, yes, it's future thinking, but here's what we're doing in the short term. Here is digestible bits of these projects that are going to lead to our end goal over the next 3, 6, 12 months. And here's what I need from you, and you, right? This isn't I own this project and I'm telling everyone what to do. It's really to say we own this project together. There are different steps of this process where you are going to lead this. Insights and analytics, you're going to have to lead the data component and building out the right dashboards. Our IT infrastructure, you're going to need to set up the foundation of the technologies that we need. And then there's the marketing team to provide the right messaging, our sales team for, let's say, execution, some guidance. But really, it's for our responsibility as the CX team to say, here's what the plan looks like, here's what we're going to achieve, here's small wins here and there. I can't roll out customer engagement indexing tool tomorrow because nobody even knows what that is. I barely know what it is. So I think it's something that we need to work on in the next 9 to 12 months. What's simple and digestible is personas, is building out adoption ladders, building out message mapping. It sounds simple, but a lot of this basic foundation isn't set within some of these organizations, and that's where we need to start building this. Now, one thing that I've also noticed, and this is more so my last company, but my last company was a company of acquisitions. So we bought a lot of companies, a lot of products, and then integrated within our current system. The problem was our system was not foundationally set. So we struggled to get these products, within our portfolio and executing on them. So I think that was one thing that we kind of focused in on and said, well, how can we change this process up a little bit? Nobody likes to talk about process, but it's really something that we need to make sure we're pulling in. Nivi had a good point on how do you integrate new channels, right, into your existing system. That's just a foundational element that I think we need to talk about in addition to new acquisitions, in addition to new customer bases, whatever it might look like.
Yeah, certainly. And Chris, beyond impact, any other operational learnings that, from your experience that you could kind of shed some light on?
I'm looking at my notes here, and one thing for us was coming from a customer experience lens, and then my background has also been like data, digital technology. So it's not the most fun topic, but cleanliness of data is really important because the data that we take in is our analytics is only going to be as good as that data that we have internally. And so whenever we set up a new campaign, whenever we identify a new customer base and we create a campaign for it, work with a new vendor or an existing vendor, we need to make sure the data coming in is sound. And when I look at some of the vendors and I've been with Takeda now for almost 10 months, I'm already looking at the data that we're taking in, and it is not up to par. I mean, we are lacking on a lot of the insights that we need. And so we're going back and spending more time to say, hey, we need to clean up this data. Yeah, the FIA might be in place, but the way you tagged this data is not correct. So we can't action on this. So now we have to do kind of a full assessment. And I think that's just a learning I wish we had done much sooner. And then the big thing is downstream when you look at measurement too. Our measurement plans can't be one of those things where we roll out a new project, a new campaign, takes us 3 months, and we launch and say, hey, what was that measurement plan again? Right? It's getting leadership buy-in up front, getting whoever is going to be the end users of that measurement or end dashboard to really give their feedback as soon as possible so that we can kind of build this out. We can pull in the I&A team or Insights and Analytics team at the right time and then get this reporting infrastructure in place. So that's really important for us from an operational and kind of executional standpoint.
Great. So data hygiene and measurement. So that sounds, pretty foundational and oftentimes is often overlooked until you run into that issue and say, like we need to stop what we're doing to basically go back and cover our tracks. But, again, as we think about these transformational activities, it's not just additive, right? It's fixing what you have. It's more of the hygienic, how can we clean up our room before we, get more toys or get new furniture or whatever it is, right? Nivi, anything you wanted to add from an operational learnings perspective?
Yes, just to add to what Chris said, I think it's also important that all your teams are chasing that same goal. So how do you ensure that the vision that you have and the strategy that you have and how you're positioning the company, that everybody is bought into that plan? And how do you sort of reinforce that along that 3-year or 5-year journey, no matter where people are or where they move within the organization? So I think it's really important to have that collective vision and chase that down.
Yeah, certainly. And I like how you called it a journey. We've heard about HCP journeys, HCP engagement journeys even, patient journeys, right? And so as we think about omnichannel, it's a journey in itself, right? It's not a flick of the switch and saying, all right, I want to be omnichannel today, right? So it takes a lot of time, right? And so it takes a lot of coordination amongst the functions, certainly understanding what you have already, right? And is that efficient enough for what you're trying to do, right? So starting with some key business questions, right? Understand what is that 3-year path? What do you want it to be, right? What do you want to be when you grow up? If it's a merging organization, or if it's large, it's like how do we kind of manage at scale? So I think thinking about it as a journey is super helpful because it helps you kind of break down into milestone chunks, right? Versus saying, hey, let's slam in this new system and another system and another. It becomes a spider web of technologies, and fortunately or unfortunately, that's kind of what Matt and I focus on within clients. It's walking in and understanding what does that ecosystem look like, and then oftentimes we will go back and look at some of the previous year's strategies, and it's sometimes a bit of a whack-a-mole game, right? Where it's something pops up and we want to let's do this strategy here or this tactic here, and so it becomes okay. Well, how did you solve for that problem, and are they even connected? So it becomes a kind of a really complex network of people and processes or lack of processes and data. And so, what we're really trying to say is you should be innovative, right? But I think it's do it strategically, right? Understand, does it even require, is the question you're trying to answer, does it really require innovation? Sometimes yes, right? And so sometimes to differentiate, you need to go that way. But maybe we could talk a little bit more about, it being more of a journey rather than a sprint, Matt. Maybe if you could start from a couple of your perspectives that that you could add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is a tension, I would say, just generally in the pharma sort of commercial side of the business between your operating plan and that focus on quarter, current cycle versus something like customer-centric transformation or, on omnichannel-enabled customer transformation, which is going to take 3, 5, maybe even more years, unfortunately. So how can you spell out that journey is key. I think sponsorship within that is really important, getting that executive level sponsor. And I don't just mean sort of anointing somebody, like actually that truly understands what we're talking about. The prior presentation from Swoop, starting with that definition of what are we doing, what's in scope, what's out of scope, are we all meaning the same thing when we talk about where we're doing, where we're going. I think that's critical, and having that understood and bought into at the sponsor level hugely greases the wheels in these types of transformation, and that commitment to the 3-year journey. And obviously underpinning that is the same language and lexicon. I think that's really, really important. Connected to that, I think, is this idea of sort of, just broader, I'll say, education and training. Like I think to move faster, we sometimes need to move a little bit slower and make sure that both, the senior leadership, but also, the operational members of the organization have the requisite skills and capabilities. A lot of the times when we're talking about doing something new in a space that is net new to the organization, it's sort of done with spitballs and sticky tape rather than actually kind of specialist expertise, and that's what's needed to drive things forward. So that investment in education and training is I think also very key. I think the other one is just sounds really obvious, but I see it get missed along the way is just being obsessive about the customer and bringing that voice of the customer in at multiple checkpoints along the journey. It's really easy to do that sort of, the PMR up front, and then we get the direction and off we go. But, if this is going to take months, if not years to get there, are you checking in? Are you pressure testing? Because, we often see that sort of technology and functionality becomes the proxy for innovation, and we do things because the system or the tool can, not necessarily because the customers want or the business is able to execute. If you can find that kind of intersection between this is something our customers want, this is something we're capable of delivering against, and this is ultimately something we can drive value from, then making sure you're kind of anchored in that sweet spot as you move forward, and regularly bringing that kind of sounding board, if you will, of customer input, customer feedback along the way, rather than just up front and at the end, I think is really important from my perspective.
Yeah, certainly. Nivi, anything you'd like to add to that?
Definitely, in terms of the measurement framework that you're going to set up and sort of see what the impact is from all of that shared strategy, whatever the vision the company is going after. I think that helps get leadership buy-in, but I think another important piece of that is how do you constantly optimize for that, and how do you bring in that feedback, to your point, Matt, about bringing the voice of customer. That becomes very crucial in differentiating yourself from the rest of the competition.
Yeah, certainly. And so even as we try to dissect the overall omnichannel journey, so depending on where an organization might be in there, oftentimes it's a pretty simple but effective way to kind of understand where are we at currently as a broader organization. And so a simple start, stop, and continue is a good way to understand, like, you shouldn't just keep doubling down in areas that just haven't really shown fruits of the labor, right? And so, it's okay, as Matt mentioned, to take a pause, right? Stop and understand, like, maybe the innovation needs to be focused on how do I get to that customer, right? How do I get their voice back? And then what do I do with it? Versus, let's try to just buy more data and we'll figure it out. Like, the innovation needs to be in certain areas that maybe are atraditional to where innovation has been historically. So Chris, maybe we could start with you. Things that you might think about from a start perspective, maybe a stop, and maybe a continue from an omni-channel transformation, or even just anything kind of along the effort of how do we get to that personalized engagement, that customer centricity?
I think that was the the way to frame it is it's not about omnichannel, it's more about how you personalize in your messaging. And for us, it's not, and I think there's a question later that we might address, but it's not how can you be everywhere all at once, this omnichannel approach. It's really being more hyper-targeted and personalized and tailored in your messaging to certain customers. And that's something that we are, I would say, continuing to do. So there's absolutely a place for your maybe broader omnichannel messaging to certain customers if you maybe don't quite know their journey or where they are in their journey. Maybe you just haven't quite identified that yet, and that's completely fine. But there are other customers that we're identifying at the segment level based off their attitudes, their beliefs, some of their behaviors, their prescribing behaviors. We can tell you exactly where they are in their journey and then what's to come next. And so for those people, we're really trying to be very intentional about the messaging we deliver to them. Now, when I go back to the brands and say, well, do we have that messaging, and realize we don't, okay, well, we need to think about where do we have those message gaps. And that's really important to our organization right now is where do we need to start creating content for particular sets of segments. And it doesn't make sense, and it's not really scalable at the moment to create content for every single segment based off of where we have gaps. So for us, one thing that we're starting to do is think about modular content and why that's important. Modular content is not, the be-all to end-all. It's not our saving grace or anything like that, but it's a way for us to process-oriented create content in a very efficient way so we can identify, first of all, our areas of opportunity with our customers, and then where we can create content for those customers in a very more efficient way through our MLR process. This is a huge shift in our organization thinking and mentality because our MLR process needs to change as well. And we've brought this in from the leadership, from the global level. They are bought into this idea. We are starting to pilot this in UCAN and in the US here and what modular content can do for us. So now we're exploring ideas from a marketing and a CX lens on how can we create this content that is more personalized. And if we show some good fruits of our labor, then we're going to roll this out to not only the rest of the organization, but to, with our business unit, just other segments that we find valuable. So I think that's kind of a big piece for us. Matt, you touched on this, Matt Smith, you touched on this with collecting customer feedback. We don't really do that today, or at least we don't do a great job of it. So identifying where customers are in their journey, right? We can only kind of surmise where they are based off of certain data points, but we need to start collecting that HCP and patient data to tell us what is working for you, what isn't, and actually get that from some of our vendors that we work with today. Because that is going to be critical when we do kind of our measurement planning to say, at this point they were here in their journey, they have moved across their journey, and here's what their journey has looked like, and here's the feedback that we've collected for them. And then the last piece for us is, and I should have led with this, but it's really, yes, it's relevant messaging, but more importantly, relevant timing too. Because your messaging is going to be only as good as the timing that it is. So if you miss your window of opportunity and engage with customers, maybe they already had a conference and you just missed your opportunity to talk to them at that conference, and you're that sales rep, you're not going to get in the door with them for another 3 months. That's going to be tough to re-engage with them. And you have 3 months of a time period where maybe it's completely dark and you can't get in there. For other key moments for us, it's like I mentioned earlier, patient identification. And when you get that positive lab alert for some of these hospitals, right, we need to get in the door and make sure the messaging is relevant to that patient type, and what their next course of action is. And so we need to alert not just the prescribing physician, but the supporting care team, the pharmacist, make sure that product is on formulary, make sure it's within pathways. So now we're talking about engaging our sales team, our account team, and our marketing teams all at once. And that's, again, a timing thing. So to coordinate that effort, I know in the past we've called that orchestrating or orchestration, right? We're kind of moving this into a different methodology and really saying, well, let's personalize that journey. So that's kind of our start, stop, continue right now.
Awesome. Matt, any thoughts on start, stop, continue?
I think the big one for me, which I think we've sort of been implicit around, is in this sort of space of innovation and piloting and experimenting. Like a big part of that is that aspect of like saying no to things and being able to stop doing certain things in order to fund others. So, you know, it doesn't sound super glamorous, but like, have you really got an audit of everything that's sort of playing in this space? And do you, across your organization, right? Do you understand all the different facets across all the different functions and all the different touch points? And then trying to figure out, you know, how do I kind of move the pieces, the existing pieces around, and the, you know, the investments associated with those to pull that through, right? Because for me, I think there's a lot of activity going on in the space, but it's probably not all as coordinated against a clear strategy and sort of execution plan. So step one is almost kind of take stock of what have you got, and then have that ability and deliberate planning to be able to, if not stop, perhaps at least pause, and have more of sort of a release wave of how we're going to move things forward in a more sort of coordinated manner. What it ends up that you kind of stop or start, I think, will depend on the organization. For some, it may be that actually modular content becomes an area where you say, we're not going to lead with innovation, we're going to be a fast follower in that space by deliberate design. For others, it may be that's the area that you want to innovate around. But again, I think kind of understanding this, where do we want and need to be first, versus where are we okay to say, look, let's let the market move around us. We understand what's going on, and we'll move quickly to catch up speed as and when the time is right from a maturity perspective.
Yeah, no, certainly. All right, so we got about 5 minutes left. Wanted to get into more of a quick lightning round here. So obviously maybe 5 years ago there was like the 2025 plan. So certainly that's around the corner, but wanted to do a quick hit exercise of maybe it's the Twitter kind of 130 or whatever characters. Just one single statement or two. Chris, start with you. 2030 plan, what would be the couple things that you would want the industry, but not only that, your organization to focus on most?
Ours is N of 1 right now. I don't think that's realistic, but in the next few years, but N of 1 marketing. Right now we're getting down to the level of segmentation, so we're bucketing our targets into, you know, certain categories, but to get to that N of 1 of personalization and messaging is kind of what we're striving for. Obviously there are ways to do that, but I'll just leave it at that.
That's a good aspiration. Nivi?
I would love to talk at length about this, but my talk right after lunch is all about this, so stay tuned, everybody.
I'm trying to think of something pithy. I would say something like omnichannel marketing is dead, long live customer engagement. By which I mean, I think it was Paul that said, like, omnichannel should include sales and marketing. It should be inherent in regular day-to-day marketing. If by 2030 we can get this to more of a business as usual, we lose the buzzwords, we lose the hype, and this just becomes day-to-day, matter of fact. We think customer first, we think coordinated, we think personalized. You know, that to me would be a good aspirational goal for 2030.
Amazing. Couple minutes left. Any questions?
Yes. We see historic information from McKinsey, like 79% of initiatives fail transformation. And I think BCG came out last month and said something like 82. So we're still really up there. But I'd love to understand from the team, I hear about POV and pilot forever and ever and ever. How do you make the cultural shift? How do you get out of pilot hell and get into real experience that shifts behavior? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I could start here, and Chris kind of touched on it, but I think so your investment needs to be within your own organization first, right? And so when you're taking on a transformation, do we have the right people in place? Do we have the right processes, right? So oftentimes these, you know, whatever those statistics are pointing to, they fail because those aren't really in place, right? And so you might not have the right or dedicated leader that's driving that transformation, or maybe you don't have, you know, the right level of support mechanisms in place, whether it's process or having a dedicated legal reviewer, right? So because oftentimes the transformation just takes forever, right? And so, you know, having strategic like end goals in mind, like, hey, phase one is going to be, here's what we're going to do, it's manageable, and here's the roles that are kind of responsible. Phase two, we'll build on that. We're not doing something brand new. We're building on that and kind of maturing it along that curve. So that's kind of how we traditionally think about it. But, you know, certainly where we see failing transformations that we try to come in and basically either revive or start fresh. Oftentimes it's, hey, what kind of, what's your operating model look like? Do you have like a kind of a central governance committee that like solely manages what this is to be at the end of the day? And oftentimes the answer is no. So I don't know, Matt or the group, if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to, I don't think pilots should be a dirty word. I think they have enormous value, first and foremost. They're just not, as with many things in the industry, they're not executed well. The typical process that we see is sort of discovery, design, deliver, right? And that is anchored around doing the pilot, and it's often someone's pet project or someone's bright idea. I think we would argue you need to bookend that kind of process with something around strategy up front, coming back to that notion that I was saying, where's this intersection between value creation, that it makes sense for the business to do this. It's in a space where we can drive value. It's aligned to something we have the capabilities to do, and then it's something that our customers want. And creating that kind of upfront strategy piece. And then on the back end would be that aspect of scalability. And you need to actually think with scalability in mind in those sort of first strategy and design spaces, so that instead of moving on to the next discovery and design and deployment, you actually sort of say, how do we embed the learnings? How do we embed the scale? And success isn't binary in that pilot. It isn't a success or failure. It's always, what did we learn? How can we apply those learnings either in the organization or to the next wave of pilots, experiments, whatever you want to call them? Leave that to you. If you can tell us how to write good RFPs, make sure we're recording this.
Oh man, our procurement team is, I don't want to get into that. But no, it's a good question. I've been on both sides of it. I've been consulting for a while, and then I moved into the pharma industry itself. And so how I suggest navigating these waters is really when it comes down to the business partner that you're working with, right, that puts that request for proposal out there, and really just talking with them and laying it out to be like, hey, I know we're going to get questions from your finance team. I know we're going to get them from procurement too. I know, are there any other teams that we need to involve? For us, it's our data digital team. Insights and analytics plays a huge role in this too, right? This is a project, your leadership's going to want to measure this. So just being upfront to be like, hey, understand this, but we need to get feedback from these folks as well, in kind of understanding how do we solidify what this RFP means, and how can we kind of win this business moving forward. Just kind of covering all your bases in that sort of sense and being upfront.
Great. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it. And seeing a couple eyes nodding, so we want